Welcome to Rambam In-Depth. Today we're going to be discussing the Rambam Hilchos Tumas Tzaras before the first perek in the caption where he lists all the mitzvahs that are going to be discussed in this section. And the very first mitzvah is Laheres B'Tzaras Adam Kedina Hakasa B'Torah, to rule with regard to the tzaras, the skin lesions that apply to a person in accordance with the laws that are written in the Torah. What this seems to be suggesting is that there's a mitzvah for a person who has the skin lesions, the negoim, the tzaras, to go to the Cohen, and for the Cohen to declare the person tamei or not, and to go through the whole procedure that is required. But the first mitzvah here, before the purification, is that you should follow the rulings that require of you to go to the Cohen. That's how the chinuch interprets the mitzvah of tzaras, that you have an obligation to go to the Cohen. The chinuch in mitzvah kuf samach tes says the mitzvah is shekol mi sheyiyeh Metzorah sheyaveh el hakohen lishal atzaratai, that whoever is a Metzorah should come to the Cohen to inquire about whether it's really tzaras. And v'hakohen yitamenu yitarenu, and the Cohen will of course declare him to be tamei or say that he's tahor. So it seems that the Rambam is doing the same thing as the chinuch. The chinuch is following the Rambam, which is a normal, common occurrence, that the chinuch follows the Rambam's approach to mitzvahs in most cases. And here too, he's following the Rambam, that the mitzvah is to instruct people to follow the laws of tzaras by going to the Cohen, and the Cohen in turn has to do what his responsibility is, to declare a tamei or tahor. The problem with this is that if you look in Sefer HaMitzvahs, Mitzvah Kuf Aleph, the Rambam says, Hishet tzivanu liyas Metzorah tamei. The commandment is that the Metzorah is tamei. It's merely a fact, which is a little strange. What's the mitzvah over here? That a Metzorah is tamei? If there's a chiyuv to go to the Kohen, he should say the mitzvah is to instruct him what to do. There's no positive action over here, and there's no negative action. It's just telling you a fact. Now, in fact, the Rambam is consistent, because in an earlier mitzvah, Mitzvah Tzadik Vav, where the Rambam starts to enumerate 13 different mitzvahs that pertain to purity and impurity, the Rambam explains that the mitzvah is not to do something. There's no mitzvah to become impure, of course. There's no mitzvah to not become impure, unless you want to go to the Beis HaMikdash or eat truma. There's no mitzvah, no prohibition involved. So what is the mitzvah? The Rambam says the mitzvah is just the mere knowledge that this is what the halacha is. The Ramban disagrees with the Rambam about that and does not list most of those mitzvahs as separate mitzvahs, because there's no instruction there. So when the Rambam here in Sefer HaMitzvah says shetzivanu liyas Metzorah tamei, he's consistent that the very knowledge that this is what a Metzorah is, that he's tamei, that is the mitzvah. But yet, here in Mishnah Torah, the Rambam seems to follow the chinuch, which is laheres, to give instruction that you have to go to the Kohen. And there's a very big nafkamina lahalacha. The nafkamina lahalacha is, if there's no mitzvah to go to the Kohen, the mitzvah is just the knowledge that if a person is a Metzorah and has these skin lesions, and he goes to the Kohen, that he's tamei, that is the mitzvah to know that fact. But if that's the only mitzvah, and there is no obligation to go to a Kohen, that would not be the same thing if the mitzvah is to go to the Kohen. What's the nafkamina? What's the practical difference in halacha? Is there an obligation to go to the Kohen b'zman hazeh nowadays? There's a very big question that's asked by many commentators. Rabbi Kiva Eger says he doesn't have a good answer to this question. Why doesn't a person have to go to the Kohen nowadays if he has skin lesions? Why don't we find a person going to a Cohen? In fact, the Rambam, and later on in Perek Yud Aleph, says clearly that the mitzvah of tzaras applies b'zman Beis HaMikdash and also without the Beis HaMikdash. In other words, it applies at all times. Why does it apply to all times? Why don't we find people going to the Cohen when they have a skin lesion? And the answer is that there is no such obligation. That would be the best answer. According to the chinuch, there is an obligation, and that would apply nowadays as well. What would have changed? But if you say that there's no mitzvah to go to the Cohen, so that's why nowadays there's no mitzvah, there's no obligation to do it, so therefore we don't see people doing it. That would be an easy answer to the question. However, many commentaries, the Radvaz and others, Minchas Chinuch, say that the Rambam in fact holds that you could have all the dinim of tzaras bisman hazeh, but the reason why we don't see it happening is because you need a Cohen meyuchas. You need a Cohen who is not just presumed to be a Cohen, but who's able to trace genealogically back to the Kohanim that served in the Beis HaMikdash, and that's definite that they're Kohanim. Since we don't have that anymore, it's only a presumption that someone is a Cohen, then you can't fulfill that requirement. That's why it doesn't apply nowadays. But if you say that there is no such mitzvah in the first place, then there's no question, there's no chiyuv, there's no obligation. That's not the mitzvah. But the Rambam seems to go in both directions. In Sefer HaMitzvahs, and also in the very beginning of the Rambam, in the Hagdama, where he lists all the mitzvahs, there he says also the mitzvah is the knowledge that the person is a Metzorah, that the person is Tameh. Not that you have to instruct the person to go to the Cohen. And yet over here, in Hilchos Tumas Tzaras, the Rambam seems to say lahayras, that it's to instruct. So there's a contemporary sefer called Mitzvahs HaMelech, who gives an answer based on the Teres Kainim that says that the only way a person can become Tameh is if the Cohen declares he Tameh. It's not that the Cohen is instructing you; it's his obligation to instruct you that you're Tameh. The Cohen makes it Tameh, just like the tumah comes from the nega, from the lesion itself. That's the sign of tumah. That's not the complete sign. The complete sign is when the Cohen declares it. That's the complete sign. So when the Rambam says lahayris, he's not referring to the obligation to go to the Cohen. He's referring to the fact that the tumah of tzaras is not just a nega; it's a nega together with a declaration of the Cohen. But perhaps one could say a simpler explanation. Even when the Rambam is talking about tumah, that these mitzvahs is a mitzvah to know that the Metzorah is tameh. What is the meaning of that mitzvah? Where's the obligation over there? The obligation is comes to the mitzvah of writing a get. There's no obligation to give a get. There's no obligation to write a get. What is the mitzvah? The mitzvah is that if you do want to give a get, the get has to be written in a certain way. Same thing over here, lahayris, to instruct that if a person has certain simanim, that declares him to be a Metzorah. If he doesn't have those simanim, those signs, then he's not a Metzorah. But it's not an instruction that you have to do something, but if there is such a thing as a Metzorah, this is what you have to determine. These are the signs that determine that the person is a Metzorah.